It's one of those nights where the house feels heavier. You leave the hallway light on and promise yourself you're going straight to bed, no scrolling. You're almost there when you hear it. One high-pitched scream from the garage. You try to rationalize it, but it's not a creak. It's not the pipes. It's a child. Their tiny voice screaming over and over like someone pressed play on a Halloween animatronic doll and broke the off button. It doesn't stop. You grab the nearest thing that feels like a weapon and you step forward towards the door because of course you do. The adrenaline makes you feel like you want to be a hero. The closer you get, the worse it sounds until your hand closes over the doorknob. Right then, everything cuts to dead air. No more screaming, no breathing, no footsteps, just your heartbeat and a door that suddenly feels like it's listening to you. Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. You may know me from my true crime channel here on YouTube, Kimbyrleigha. I am Kimbyrleigha or Kimbyr, and this is Candidly Kimbyr. And on this channel, we'll be diving in to some of the most interesting and spooky real life stories from around the web, mostly focusing on one of my favorite places, Reddit. And you seem to really like hearing real life Halloween horror stories like last week. So I promised we would do it again. And I again found creepy, spine tingling and terrifying stories. Actually, a couple of them scared me so much when I was home alone after reading them. But let's jump right in. But before I do, since we're having a little more fun on this channel than usual, I forgot that I wanted to point out my bat is back. He's been with me for many, many years. Forgot to turn him on last time. And this candle, I bring it out every year and people ask me about it. Got it at Home Goods, but I thought I'd actually show you what it does in the spirit of Halloween. It's a regular candle, okay? But when you light it, watch, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it, but like watch the front here, okay? And if you've already seen this, do you see how it just turned on? Are you kidding me? It's a color changing spider. They've got other designs. I'll link it below if I can find it because like I said, I got this at Home Goods, so you know how that is. It changes colors. Anyway, we're going to put him right there so you can watch him the entire time. But let's jump in to our very first story. Now, this one is from the Let's Not Meet subreddit. And in case you don't know what that is, because a lot of people have never even been to Reddit, they just like reading and hearing these stories. It says it's a place to read spine-tingling, unusual, terrifyingly true stories about people you never want to meet again. So this first story is entitled Trick or Treat Stalker, and it's from the poster XXT213. Here goes. I live in a substantially normal neighborhood. I can't really say that the people here are shady. Most of them are just old. To give a little background of my town, most of the streets are parallel to each other, especially the section I live in. There's a lot of young people moving in because many of the old people in town are moving into nursing homes or, unfortunately, dying. I think it would be safe to say I know most of the people who live in this area. Not personally, but I can recognize faces. Last year, my friends and I decided to go out trick-or-treating one final time. We were acting like angsty teenagers who thought it wasn't cool anymore, but we had already gotten costumes and wanted some candy. However, we thought it wasn't cool anymore. They reiterated that. But looking back, I don't think trick-or-treating is safe anymore, truly. Does anyone else wonder if it's ever been safe being out at night in the dark, disguised in costumes that make it hard to run, and being right next to other people dressed up and disguised who could be real monsters walking among us? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to go right back to the story. OP said, anyway, I had to play a field hockey game after school, so I was itching to hang out with all my friends. Finally, I headed home and got my costume on. At this point, it was getting dark, so my mom demanded I bring a flashlight. She's very protective and kind of strict. My dad, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's more willing to let me go places on my own and convince my mom it would be okay if I went out trick-or-treating with a group of friends. My mom doesn't like there not being a parent around, but she knew we would stay within a couple of streets. Eventually, she let up and allowed me to go. My friends began to show up at my house, but by the time we left, it was pitch black. Once again, my mother warned me about strangers. I scoffed at her, trying to shake off the embarrassment of being lectured by my mom in front of my friends. I knew she was right, though. Maybe a group of high school girls could take down a predator, but I know I couldn't by myself. I stayed as close as I could with my friends for most of the night, keeping an eye out for any weird figures or killer clowns, since there were rumors of some terrorizing in elementary school a few towns over. Everything seemed to be going well, and we were all having a good time, apart from trying to avoid our classmates out of sheer humility for trick-or-treating. All of my friends and I made some really good memories, and then it happened. It was around 8:45, and some of my friends were tired and wanted to be picked up. We gradually made it back to my house, where they phoned their parents and left. I was a little upset. It might have been my inner child in me, but I wanted more candy. I knew this was quite possibly my last year trick-or-treating ever. I wasn't ready to give it up yet. OP, I've never been ready to give it up. So I get you. Free candy, a chance to be someone else for just one night. And again, I ask all of you, what's the age limit? And OP went on to say, oh, and by the way, anyone listening who's unfamiliar with Reddit, don't feel bad if you don't know what OP means. It's just original poster, and I will be saying that often. So OP said, my one friend, we'll call her Nancy, did not want to stop yet either. After all of my other friends left, we asked my parents if we could go out for another 30 minutes or so. My mom was reluctant. However, my dad told her that I was old enough and most people wouldn't answer doors this late anyway, so we would be back pretty soon. It was 9:10 p.m. at this point. Nancy and I went to the next street over in the opposite direction we went with our group previously. I remember feeling uncomfortable for some reason, but brushing it off as I turned on my flashlight. It was pitch black, and the sidewalks were bumpy and cracked because the town is too lazy to fix them. I had a pretty bright flashlight that could shine a good 20 feet ahead of me. We made it to the next street and looked down. There were barely any porch lights on. I guess people figured the little kids were done and decided it was the end of the night. However, Nancy and I were not ready to give up, and we started at the first house on the left. No answer. Okay, we went across the street that had a porch light on. No answer from that house either. I still wasn't willing to stop though. We tried a few more houses and got no answers. Nancy suggested we try 3 other houses, and if no one answered, then we would go back to my place. I agreed, sadly, knowing that no one would give us candy this late into the night and that this was the end. That's when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. It was a black figure walking down the road towards the house me and Nancy were standing at. He was wearing all black, with his face down and a hood over his head. Something about him made my stomach lurch. I discreetly pointed him out to Nancy. She said she saw him a few houses before, just turning onto the street. This made me feel even more uneasy. Quickly, he began to approach us with his head down and his hands in his sweatshirt pocket. Looking back, who knows what he could have been hiding in there. The street was dead quiet, except for me and Nancy, so he must have heard us. I instructed for us to go to the house across the street to make it seem like we were trick-or-treating and never noticed the man. We went to the house and knocked on the door. I was secretly praying someone would answer so the man could not get near, but no one did. I was really freaking out now. I turned around and he was walking on the street in front of the house right next to us. Then I realized he crossed the street too, and a wave of panic overtook me. I grabbed Nancy's arm and sprinted to the house he had just passed. Then he circled around and began following us in the same direction. I knew I had to do something. He began walking faster and faster towards us. Nancy and I sprinted for it. There's a good amount of space in between this street and mine, but I was on track, and I was willing to do anything to get away from the psychopath. He didn't run. But when I finally looked back, I saw him quickly walking the same way, still with his head down. From what I could tell, he seemed fairly young, maybe in his early 30s. I didn't recognize anyone like this from the area. Nancy and I were still running though. Finally, we made it to my street, and we hid near some bushes at the end. Then I realized we still had our flashlights on, and that's how he was so easily able to locate us. We shut them off, crouched near the bushes, and waited. I knew that if we tried to run to my house, he would see us. There wasn't enough time to make it there without him getting to the end of the street and seeing us. I was also terrified that he would find out where I lived. Never bring someone who's following you back to your house. Nancy and I finally saw him. He stood in the middle of the street and just peered down it. I could see his eyes. That's how close we were. They looked so blank and menacing. He knew we were somewhere, just not in the bushes, only 10 feet away. After a few moments, he carried on walking, and Nancy and I waited until he was at the next street. We could see him walking down the sidewalk, and then we booked it to my house. I told my parents, but my father only laughed, and my mother looked too tired to care. My brother sat there and made fun of me for being paranoid. I'm never going trick-or-treating again. Who knows what could have happened to me that night, or what that man was capable of. Later, there was a news story about children who had been abducted a few towns over. Instead, it could have been me and Nancy. So, creepy Halloween stalker, let's not meet. Yikes. So, I always try to at least think of a logical reason for something like this. Was the man lost? Did he actually live in that neighborhood and was merely walking around really late at night? Or was he even just trying to scare you? It was Halloween. You were older than the little kids. It was past the point of people handing out candy. Maybe he lived in one of those houses and he just kind of wanted to mess with you that night. But you tell me. I know that I would be scared if this happened to me. Don't get me wrong. I scare very easily. I just also do my best to think of a reason that it happened. Maybe to be less terrified. Was he a stalker? Maybe. Or even worse. The OP's dad laughed about it though. So I think that might upset me. Even though people might not think they would be scared, if someone's scared, it's valid. I wondered what town this was in, because last week's story was also about a hooded man that knocked on a door and allegedly went to murder an elderly lady that same night. But some commenters didn't think that this story was real. For example, Big TIT Brit said, "Your family is a bunch of a-holes, and he was definitely following you, whether just to mess with you or not. That is scary." And I thought about it. I was like, well, is Brit right? The dad did laugh. The mom didn't seem to be worried, even though OP said in the beginning that she was strict and worried for them, even warning about strangers before they went out. So maybe it could have been her dad. But how would he have made it back to the house before the kids, Brit? Explain that. Others questioned whether this story was real at all, but I was thinking, it's really not that dramatic to be entirely out of the realm of possibility at all. Juggler86 said, "But I thought this place was supposed to be about true stories. Come on. If true, what makes you even think this person abducted, quote, multiple children, unquote, a few towns over? Do you know how rare it is for multiple kids to be abducted at the same time?" And I have to say, do you know how not rare that is, actually? We just sadly don't hear about all crimes, abductions, and even worse, that are happening unless the media or our source of news talk about them. And sadly, not all of them are newsworthy, to be fair. But I get it. Maybe this story sounded fake. I thought it was pretty detailed to be fake, and OP was merely saying they could have been taken, which is a valid fear. OP even responded to this comment saying, "I know this story doesn't sound real, but I wasn't saying this guy did it. I was saying it more in the context that there are a lot of people who don't have good intentions. And from what I remember, the children were siblings, and the person did not get very far with them. They took them, and they were found later that night. Sorry if I made it sound more dramatic than it is, but I can assure you, this story is true." Maybe retelling a story, we do add a bit of flair here and there, but overall, OP's story sounds plausible to me. My real question is, what time is too late to be trick-or-treating? To be knocking on strangers' doors or ringing their doorbells? Because in last week's stories, we talked about handing out candy and running out, and that being the time you kind of called it a night. But if the candy is still flowing, when's the cutoff? 9 p.m.? 10? I think 10 is pretty late. But speaking of it getting late on Halloween night, this next story happens well after closing time, so to speak, when trick-or-treating truly is over for the night. It's also from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, and the poster is Hannah Robertson. The story is called Creepy Halloween Stalker. I was interested in the story right away because it happened out in Scotland, and I've always been interested in hearing about things from other countries and their customs compared to mine here in the United States, and this one did not disappoint. I have questions, but here goes. They wrote, Halloween has unfortunately never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating. So while I was out shopping all day with my mom, we decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see Ouija with my boyfriend. So when I got home, I was getting myself ready to go out and my mom was busy putting the shopping away. So when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. Side note, I always thought it was pronounced Ouija board because of the A at the end, that darn silent letter, I guess. And sometimes I joke that I should abbreviate Kimbyr as Kim, but have the silent B at the end. And when someone asks me to spell my name, I'll say, it's Kim with a B. But anyway, I don't know if you know that the name for the spirit board came from the board itself. So how do we really know how it wanted it to be pronounced? Wikipedia actually says Ouija, and it explains that the belief has always been that the word Ouija or Ouija comes from the French oi and German ja. The words for yes, and I might even be pronouncing them wrong, but it's a misconception. The fact is, the name was given from a word spelled out on the spirit board when a medium, Helen Peters Nosworthy, asked the board to name itself. So because we've never heard the spirit's voice, as far as I know, how do we know it's Ouija? I'm just curious. When she asked what the word meant, the answer she found was good luck. That's a much better reason for such a weird name for this board. Must be from another realm. But anyway, I've always had a thing for Ouija boards, but back to the story. OP went on to explain what happened when she opened the door to trick-or-treaters. She said, there were children from our street, the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize, as well as an adult at the end of the path. I guessed either a father or an older brother by the size. And they were dressed all in black and had some sort of mask covering their face, but it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. Anyway, they all told me their jokes and I gave them their treats and they made their way back down the path and on to the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed and he wasn't watching the children either, and he was looking right at me, and my skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just staring at me. I backed slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. And I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was all right. And he took off in the opposite way from the children. He hadn't been with them at all. And he left as soon as he realized I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out and told my boyfriend all about it when he came to the house to pick me up. But I quickly forgot all about it when we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late and trick-or-treating was well and truly over around here. When I got inside, my mom was just getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so they could do their last-minute business and they could meet my dad on his way home from work. so I was going to be home alone. After my horrible encounter posted on here, I don't really like being home alone, but it's worse on Halloween, and it always has been. Well, OP, I didn't want to pause your story, but my curiosity was killing me. I thought, wait, what does she mean after her horrible encounter that she posted on here? I had to know the backstory, and it does matter for context. That one was pretty long as well and very detailed, which is usually right on target for a channel like this. But since we have other Halloween tales to cover, I figured I would summarize it. This poster wrote another story in the Let's Not Meet subreddit. She said that since she was 13, she was left alone at home while her parents were at work. Most of the time, it was from 4 to 11 p.m. And she used to stay with a friend or relative until her parents thought that she was mature enough to handle it on her own. At first, she loved the freedom of being able to do whatever she wanted. And she wasn't afraid because her 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Cassie and Kira, were there with her. She wrote, I always felt completely safe knowing that most people run a mile when they see our dogs getting walked in the middle of the day. They're both complete sweethearts, and unless you can be kissed to death, you're fine around them. Despite how loving they are, I've always known that they would jump to protect me if I was in danger. For 2 years, nothing scary happened. But one night, when Hannah was 15, she was watching a horror movie. It was Scream of the Banshee. She said, typical plot. People find some creepy box and open it, letting something out. People die, and their family members and people who didn't die at the beginning spend the rest of the movie trying to figure out what it was that killed everyone and try to make it stop. Well, her older dog, Kira, went upstairs to her parents' room to sleep, and the other dog stayed with her. But she wrote, suddenly, I heard a loud thump from my parents' bedroom, which is directly above the living room, like the dog falling or jumping off the bed. And then there was a loud crash as she ran into the mirror doors across the room from the bed. By now, I was already on my feet, and Cassie was on high alert and growling. And that's when the growling from upstairs started. Bring on my heavy breathing and the hairs on the back of my neck standing on edge. Cassie was staring out the living room window and into our backyard garden. But I was too chicken shit to turn around to see what she was looking at. But my mind quickly went back to the dog upstairs. I called out to her before hearing another bang, like something else was up the stairs. And then she yelped loudly and came flying down the stairs, almost literally, ran to the end of the hall and caught her as she crashed into the front door once, twice, 3 times, as though she was trying to break through the glass panel. And then she ran back down the hall and into the living room, jumped on the sofa, and threw up everywhere. Aw, that poor pooch. Well, then Hannah wrote, Cassie started to bark and jump up at the window, looking between me and the window. That's when I finally looked. There was someone standing in the garden, looking in the window. But I couldn't see a face. I was completely frozen to the spot, staring at this person who I assumed was a guy by their build. But when they were so close to the window that their nose was almost touching it, they slammed their gloved fist onto the glass, and I screamed bloody murder, and they bolted, hurling the fence and taking off into the night. I grabbed my phone from the chair, I ran down the hall and out of the house. Once in the garden, I spotted someone bolting from there too, and taking off in the same direction as creeper number 1. Hannah said she ended up calling her mom hysterical. She looked into her parents' bedroom and the window was wide open, and she just lost it. Her mom asked her boss if she could leave early, and she got home fast. Hannah said that the police were called, and they had a report a few nights before this, just a few streets away, that there were also 2 men dressed in black harassing a couple in their home by running around banging on windows and trying to break down their door. Hannah explained that by the looks of the back door, the man in the back garden had been trying to get in when she rushed back to the living room and when the dog puked all over the couch. She said when he saw me, he decided to scare the shit out of me, but ran when I screamed because I could have alerted my neighbors. The guy who was running out in the front garden when I ran outside had climbed down the side of the house after coming back out of my parents' bedroom. He had climbed through the window where Kira had been asleep on their bed. I don't know who they are, and I don't know what they wanted or what they planned to do when they got in the house. They must have known that I was home alone, and I hate to think about what their intentions might have been. To the guys who continued to give me nightmares, let's not meet. So there you go. So Hannah has a fear of being alone, and weird, scary, creepy men in black have tried breaking into her home. Valid. After that encounter, right? She is fearful. But now back to her Halloween story. She wrote this. Anyway, I was home alone and I grabbed some snacks and went up to my bedroom and onto my computer so I could do some writing and scroll through Tumblr and listen to music. After my first creepy encounter with the guys coming into my house and into my backyard, my dad bought a motion sensor light and attached it to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally, it would go off whenever a cat walked along our fence, but it will usually go off after a couple of minutes. I always know when the light has come on because it lights up my whole room given where it's placed. And while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew that it would go off soon, but 5 minutes passed and it still hadn't gone off. So I opened my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ASS when I looked out and saw the creep from hours before sitting on the fence. By the way, recap, remember the guy was with the trick-or-treaters, but not with the trick-or-treaters? Same guy. She said, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me. And it was already seriously creepy again, and I didn't know what to do. I just got flashbacks from before. Luckily, I heard the front door open and my parents coming into the house with the dogs. So I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My dad didn't question me. He just took the dogs and rushed to the house, threw the back door open and ran outside. And then I heard him shouting, "Get the out of here, you creep. I'm going to phone the police." Dad scared him off. But I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget all about the whole night. So to the creepy guy in the mask waving at me from the end of my path and sitting on my fence, let's not meet. Wow. Okay, Hannah, you've been through a lot. I would be terrified, but I would also call the police if I truly thought that this person was a creep and could potentially do me harm. There is a lot to unpack here and comments to read, but my first question was actually one that commenter Sladria asked OP. They said, do kids in Scotland tell jokes instead of saying trick or treat? That's so freaking cute. I'm really sorry this happened to you. I'd have nightmares forever. What is the name of your other experience so I can read it? So as you can see, that commenter, just like me, was super curious and they wanted to know about the telling of the joke thing too, because Hannah mentioned in her story, they all told me their jokes and I gave them their treats. Since Hannah didn't answer that commenter, I Googled it. It says in Scotland, the custom of guising is popular. It's a Halloween activity for children. Unlike in America, where it's the trick-or-treating tradition where children simply ask for sweets, guising requires children to perform a trick, a song, or tell a joke in exchange for a treat. The word guising comes from the word disguising, as children traditionally wear costumes to blend in with spirits and protect themselves from harm. So there you have it. And I had to say, I would be way too shy to have done that. Trick-or-treating is hard enough. I am definitely really shy when it comes to the real world. But commenter RedPants96 said, there are some serious creeps who think that since it's Halloween, it's okay to harass people. I'm glad your dad didn't even hesitate and scared him away. And I'm really glad that creep didn't try to get in your house. I'm sorry that he ruined your Halloween experience. And I agree. We know from previous stories last week how creeps can be in disguise right on the street with children. Now, Jay Hazy 4414 said, really wish you had called the cops. He's clearly a danger to kids. And then OP responded to them saying, I wouldn't have hesitated to call the cops if he had followed the kids that I'd given candy to at my door, but he hadn't. And when I was home, it was far too late for any children to be outside. I did warn my neighbors about it the next morning, though, and asked them if they had seen anyone or if their children had, but nobody had seen a thing. Fair enough, but here's what's really creepy. I looked, and Hannah, the original poster, hasn't posted since her final post right after this one that was simply entitled, "What Should I Do?" The post is archived, and I don't know if she wrote anything else, but the only comment I saw suggested, "You should alert the police and they will send a patrol to sit outside your house. My dad was a cop a few years ago, and he did this once. And also lock all the doors and activate your security system if you have one." Hannah's last comment on there was, "Unfortunately, people over here in Scotland don't normally do patrols on people's houses. The cops out here suck, and they won't even send someone unless the guy shows up and tries to do something. I really do wish we had a security system." And then Hannah responded to a couple other comments on her Halloween post and never posted on Reddit again from this account. And they had been active prior to this story. So Hannah, I truly hope that you are okay. What's scary is, what if, you know what, I'm not going to even say it, but what I will say is I've got yet another story from the paranormal subreddit, because why not just sprinkle some of those ghostly ones in, right? It's fitting for Halloween. This one is from Peaches and Mangoes. It's entitled, "Sharing My Personal Experience from My Childhood Haunted House." I'm so ready for this one. Get cozy or get close to someone if you're afraid of hearing scary stories all alone, because these freak me out. OP wrote, "Hi guys, this is my first post in this subreddit. My whole life has been filled with crazy, otherworldly experiences, but the most vivid ones that I think of often are from my childhood home. A very rural area up in the mountains. It would take us 45 minutes to an hour to get into the city, driving up and down windy, dangerous roads. I'd love to share with you and hear what you guys have to say. Back in the early 2000s, my parents and I lived in a neighborhood that was heavily involved in witchcraft, Satanism, etc. We didn't actually discover this until we had moved away, so it all made sense afterwards. We lived in this house for 5 years. My house was 2 stories. We had a basement, which was our family room, that also had a separate office room. We detached the door to this room so it would be permanently open, directly facing the couch we would sit on to watch TV together as a family. Adjacent to the office, we had an electric piano right against the wall. So the office entrance would be on our right if we were sitting there. To go upstairs, you'd have to directly pass the office and face the door that goes into our garage. Now, this information will be important later, and I have to thank you for that, OP, because I like direction when I'm reading a story and wondered why so many details about the rooms and where they were. But back to her story. The first year was fine, but gradually the events became much more malicious and sinister, to the point where we couldn't take it anymore. We were likely the only Christian family in our neighborhood, and I believe others quickly caught on because we didn't celebrate Halloween and didn't participate in giving out candy to neighborhood kids. This angered our community. Even though we were kind to others, we kept to ourselves for the most part. Our house was egged, and we became a target of seemingly harmless pranks and house vandalism. Then, all of the paranormal events started happening after my black cat disappeared right before Halloween. We were coming home from church one night, and it was close to midnight. We pulled into our neighborhood, and sitting on the sidewalk corner all by himself was a little boy in a green shirt. My parents were slightly unsettled because it's unsafe and unusual for a child to be out this late at night. They considered talking to this boy, but when we drove by him, he looked up, and my parents saw he had no face. Stop. This is scary. What do you mean, OP? Well, a completely blank stare where his face should be. Needless to say, we booked it home, and my parents didn't tell me at the time because I was maybe 5 or 6 to spare me from nightmares. But some years later, they told me this is what happened. Then things started happening around the house. My mom and I used to take piano lessons, so one day, while my dad was cooking lunch, my mom was in the basement practicing on the electric piano. I was in my parents' bedroom watching Stanley, a children's cartoon that was really popular back then. While my mom was practicing piano, a child's hand popped out of the office room and mimicked a child's voice, telling my mom to come and play.
Come play.
She thought it was me and told me to cut it out. The voice coerced her again to play. And my mom became irritated that I was distracting her from practicing. So she stomped into the office to find no one there. I'll never forget how pale she was when I heard her scream my name and run up the stairs. She asked my dad where I was, and since I heard her, I ran to her, asking what she needed from me. She asked me if I was messing with her, and I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. My dad chimed in and said, I was in the bedroom the whole time. She concluded that it must have been her imagination. She apologized to us and went back downstairs. Not even 10 minutes later, she runs back upstairs panicking, saying that the child's hand appeared again in the office, talking to her, and she knew it couldn't have been me. She was freaked out the rest of the day for sure, and I just have to say, burn it down, burn it to the ground. But there's more. Another instance was when we were watching The Ring in the basement at night. First of all, OP, why? Why would you be doing that in that house? She said around the time of the first jump scare of the movie, when they open the closet and see the disfigured girl, my dog starts barking like crazy at the same office entrance. He would charge at it and then back away, as if something was trying to force its way closer to us. It became really cold, and I started crying because I felt scared and uncomfortable at my dog's strange behavior. My dad turned on the light in the office, but nothing was there. My dog was going nuts, chasing something that we couldn't see. So we decided to call it a night and go upstairs to bed. My dog had a big crate in the garage that he would sleep in, so my dad put him in there before we went to bed. At this point, we called a minister from our church to come and pray for us. He prayed for our protection, but things got so much worse after that. A few nights later, we all woke up to screaming coming from the garage. It sounded like a little girl being brutally murdered, screaming so loud it pierced our ears. My dog was also barking like crazy, so we knew we had to do something. My mom and I hid behind a dresser, and my dad hesitantly took a long decorative bamboo stick as a weapon to go into the garage and see what was going on. He said that he was shaking going downstairs, and the screaming got louder and more violent right up until his hand touched the doorknob. As soon as he did, complete silence. It was eerie and too quiet. The only thing that was making noise was my dog whimpering and barking, so my dad got him as quickly as possible and went back upstairs. We started sleeping in the same room after that. Once we settled back down, my mom and I fell asleep first, but my dad was wide awake. He said that he could hear something pressing buttons on the TV remote on his bedside table. He didn't dare look, but shut his eyes and pretended to be asleep until he eventually did. I'm going to say something first. I can't believe they haven't moved yet after all this creepy stuff is happening. But I remember when I was little and I would pull the covers over my head and close my eyes so tightly when I thought there was like a ghost, or I found out that my parents, it was actually my grandmother, left me in bed. She would have me fall asleep and then get up to clean the house in the middle of the night. It's probably why I heard random footsteps. But this isn't over. OP said another day, Mom was at work and Dad was outside mowing the lawn. And being the only child not interested in AOL dial-up internet yet, I had to find ways to entertain myself. I was spinning in circles until I would make myself dizzy. Mid-spin, I saw a man standing in the hallway with a gun pointed right at me. I was so startled, but I was so dizzy, so I fell over, scared to death. I screamed for my dad and ran sloppily to the front door. I didn't want to look back if he was still there. My dad was worried for me in my panic state, but what can he do? What could any of us have done? Dad put the house up for sale and sold it to like the first buyer. We were out of there so quick, it wasn't even funny. These events traumatized me, and I'm extremely hypersensitive to evil spirits and evil energy. Horror movies don't scare me at all compared to the real fear and panic you feel in those moments. Anyway, if you read this far, thanks so much. Hope you guys got a kick out of my childhood trauma. LOL. Oh my God. Okay. So my first thought was that little girl, her spirit was there because her life was probably lost in that home. And now she's a ghost, having to relive that horror over and over again, those loud, terrifying screams. I don't know what to say. I felt like saying, did you ever look at the records of the people who own that house? Because maybe there's a story. You never know. There was a commenter, Coltavi, that said, that's horrible. But on a good note, if you ever decide to become a movie director, you will have a great horror story. I can't imagine how it must have been living like that. OP responded with, hey, thanks. It definitely was a terrifying situation to be in. Honestly, you never know how you're going to feel or what you're going to do until you actually go through something like that. It really sounds unbelievable, but my family and I swear up and down that's exactly what happened. We can recall all events word for word without batting an eye. So I ask you, what do you think? Because one person asked if OP had pictures of this house, and she said no. The only cell phones that existed back then were those Nokia ones, but she said she might have some video footage of the house, but they were on tapes recorded on a very old camcorder. But I was like, wait, no camera photos of you living in the home after all those years? 5 years. I would need to see them. I need more information. And I'm not about to go in real life or anything and look anything up about this person. But Peaches and Mangoes, if you see this and care to provide an update or any more information, I know that I would love it. And I bet the audience would too. But since this has been a pretty long episode, longer than I expected at least, I'm going to share a subscriber story that we got last week related to the Whaley house, which I talked about in my very last episode. And then I will share one last Halloween Reddit story. First of all, thank you, Megan. I'm so sorry, I'm probably butchering that, for letting me tell your story and sharing it. It goes like this. Okay, I've never left a comment on a video before, but while you were talking about the second to last story, you said that you don't want to believe in ghosts. And I just started talking to myself saying that I didn't really believe until I went to the Whaley house. Then immediately after that was the next story. Crazy coincidence. And I have to say, that is pretty creepy. But back to her post. She said, but I do believe the Whaley house is haunted. I went and brought a professional camera with me just to see if I could get anything better with it rather than my phone. I was taking pictures in every room, and once I got into the dinner room area, suddenly my camera started glitching. The shutter sound that you hear when the picture is taken is normally really quick, but for some reason, it would make a sound, pause, and then make the sound again. It's never done that before. And when I looked back at the photos, they were all blurry, like I had moved my camera side to side while taking the picture. I was so confused and just kept trying to see if it would work, but nothing. As soon as I left that room, I took a picture and the shutter was completely fine. The pictures were perfect. I still can't explain why that happened. Never happened in any other part of the house, and it's never done it again since. And I have to say, it terrifies me when technology glitches, which can usually be explained, right? But this feels more than a malfunction. It feels like control of some kind. I think I'm going to have nightmares tonight because I did last week with all this. And anyone who hasn't watched the last video, I will put it in the cards. I will leave it below and at the end. I highly suggest you do to learn more about the Whaley house. Now, my husband, John, who is a professional photographer, among many other things, he's very talented, but he offered a technical explanation. So to be fair, I'm going to read it to you. So here's my husband's technical explanation about what could have happened with this camera. Are you ready? It's a little technical, obviously, so bear with me. A mechanical shutter works in two parts. There's two curtains. First, the first curtain opens to begin exposing the sensor. Then the second curtain closes to end the exposure. So let's say your shutter speed is 1 second. The first click, the first curtain opens, starting the exposure. The second click, after 1 second, the second curtain would close, ending the exposure. That's why long exposures sound like click, pause, click. It also will explain why your photos can look what they call dragged, which I'll show on the screen, almost like a ghostly image. So John went on to say that she might have accidentally activated one of the different drive modes that manipulate exposure or mirror lockup by brushing a button or turning a dial on the camera. And when she got back home, the camera reverted back to her normal settings, or if she went into a different room, like she said. He also said, or the knob for custom shutter switched to a different setting. There could have been other issues or scenarios that could arise to cause the same output, but the former would be Occam's razor, which means, the simplest answer is usually the one that's correct. What are your thoughts? So here's my take. I don't know. If this were to happen anywhere else, I would agree. But a haunted place? Nah. But thanks again for sharing that story. Really, it means a lot to me. But let's end with one short story that I found that really frightened me. It's from, coincidentally or ironically, it's from a subreddit that I had never visited before, Glitch in the Matrix. The poster is Natchund. The story is entitled, "The Day After Halloween, a pumpkin we didn't buy appeared in our house." And I'm already scared, so tell me more. They wrote this 2 years ago, and it starts, "This happened 9 years ago, and talking about it today still fills me with fear. My boyfriend and I were renting a property, and we were the only people to have a key. We love Halloween, and normally buy a pumpkin at least. But this year, we were both working and didn't have time for it, so we didn't buy any pumpkins or decorations at all. The day after Halloween, I was getting ready to leave for work and headed down the stairs for the first time, and my boyfriend was still in the bedroom when this happened. I got to the top of the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs was a carved pumpkin with your typical pumpkin smiley face with a lit candle inside. The worst part, it was positioned so that it was facing the stairs. I screamed. My boyfriend came to see what happened, and when he saw it, he freaked. We checked all the doors, the windows, and they were all locked. Nobody else has keys to our house, and we didn't buy any pumpkins. We, to this day, have no idea how this pumpkin appeared in our house. I recently heard about this glitch in the Matrix, and I'm starting to think this could have been that. Let me know what you guys think." Well, I have so many questions, but commenters did too. MCR 2004 asked one that I was thinking. They said, "That's extremely creepy, but if you were renting, how do you know if you were the only ones with a key?" And that was exactly my thought. OP responded, "So true. Who knows? It's kind of hard to believe a pumpkin would appear out of nowhere, but our landlord had owned the house for ages as he bought it as a fixer-upper, and that took a while. So we ended up being the first to rent it from him. We looked for a reasonable explanation for years." Now, Magical Bunny said, "I always wonder if people copy keys in rentals. First time I moved into my current rental, I came home at one time and found a few things slightly disturbed. Friend gave me the idea to put lipstick under my doorknob to see if it would smudge, and it was slightly smudged the next time." That's really interesting and kind of brilliant to put lipstick under the doorknob. I've done the whole tape on the door frame. And then another commenter, Old Fox 3027, said what I was thinking. "When bizarre things happen and there's more than one person in the house, most of the time it's the other person." And that's what I was thinking. I was like, maybe it was her boyfriend. He wanted to perhaps surprise her, didn't want her to know that he went out of his way when they were working and maybe, didn't have the time, like she said, to buy anything. And he knew she loved Halloween. So maybe he did that. And maybe he surprised her the day after Halloween. But I was like thinking, it's kind of odd. Why would you do it after the holiday? I don't know. And then I was thinking, because they were working so much, could it have been a financial thing as well? Like that year, maybe they couldn't afford it. And he wanted to do something special, but he didn't want her to know that he was spending extra money. He could have got one cheap that was already on display, already carved and everything as a pumpkin patch decoration. They do sell them for cheaper the day of Halloween because it's like over. I don't know. Maybe I'm going too far with that. But OP insisted. She said, "I've been with my partner for 12 years now, and he still gets freaked out retelling this story. Plus, he's not the sort of person. If anything, I'm more of the prankster in our relationship." But I was thinking maybe it wasn't a prank. just a kind gesture. And when it freaked her out, maybe he got embarrassed. I don't know. If it's true, that is truly creepy. I didn't get to tell you my haunted hotel story in this episode because my friend Jenna hasn't written back, so I don't have any additional information except for my perspective. But I definitely will do another Halloween episode because there is a lot to still tell you. But until then, stay safe out there, and I will see you in my very next video. Bye.